All right, we're going to learn a little bit about some basic macros. All right, so we want to learn about macros. Let's talk about what macros are. Macros are going to be a collection of commands or steps that you want to be able to perform over and over again. If you find yourself needing to repeat the same set of steps over and over again, rather than do 20 or 30 clicks to do that, we could just write a simple program that does that. An older computer science term that we might use for this might be a subroutine, or sometimes procedures is used to refer to a macro, but it's a piece of software or a small program to be run in a larger program. That's really what macros are. Our goal here is to make something that's speeds up our process, makes things faster for us. Again, so things that are going to be repeated over and over again, we want to be able to do that with a single click or fewer possibly. The language that we're going to write macros for Excel is called Visual Basic for Applications, VBA. That's the same language we're going to use in a lot of Microsoft Office programs like Word, PowerPoint, or other things like that. Those of you that learn about SolidWorks, it's a three-dimensional CAD program. It's built on a VBA platform. You can write VBA macros for SolidWorks, a variety of options for it. This class, the Intro to Engineering course that this video is intended for, it's not a programming class. My goal is not to teach you to be expert programmers. It's really just kind of a crash course survival skills type of situation. And so if you've had some programming before, that's helpful, not at all required. So that's where we're headed here. Let's see how we get there. All right, so in Excel or any other Office program, you're going to put your VBA code in what's called a module. A module is a place where your code gets stored. Now, honestly, you probably won't even notice that it's done because VBA will do it for you when you first record a macro. So when you record a macro, Excel and VBA automatically generate this place to hold that code called the module, and we'll see that when we get to it here. Now, how do we do this? The simplest way to create a macro is just simply go to the record macro function built into Excel and turn that on, and then Excel and VBA are going to try to generate the code so it can go back later and repeat the set of steps that you go through. You show it, you teach it, and it will try to write the VBA code accordingly. That code can be then later edited, modified, enhanced, and that's going to be our goal today, is to show you how do we record a macro and then add a few things to it as we go. We're going to do this right here. We're going to record a macro, do some things to some cells, and then go back later and do some changes to it. Now, normally when you start out in Excel, it's going to look something like this. There's a variety of ways you can get to macros. Up here on the ribbon, there's an option for view. Under view, you've got an option for macros. You can bring that down, and then you've got some buttons in here. Right? We could go view macros. There's no macros right now to view, so that doesn't help us. We're going to record a macro. Now, in the next lecture we'll talk a little bit about the use relative references. I'm not going to click it right now. I don't want to mess with it. For me, that's kind of a slightly more advanced feature. Let's not worry about that today. Let's just do simple macros. So I'm going to click on record macro, and I had already recorded one. We'll just record macro 1 again. And when you first record a macro, it's probably going to want to call it macro 1. You can call it whatever you want. Just change the name there. We might talk about shortcut keys, but we don't have to right now. And if you want to give some notes in here, what this macro does, put that in there. I'm not. Just going to hit OK. Now, Excel and VBA are recording right now. They are going to try to generate, as we mentioned earlier, VBA code for everything that we do. Be careful what you do until you come back over here, drag this down, and see right now it says stop recording. And there's a button down here Also, it tells you you're recording right now. Until you hit this stop recording, it's going to try to record everything you do and generate VBA code accordingly. So if the first thing I do is select cell C5, and I'm going to go to Home, and under the Home tab, I'm going to grab this paint can. That's the fill color. That changes the color of the cell. I'm going to change C5 black. And then I'm going to go to E5. I'm going to click on the paint can and make that cell black. And I'm going to go to D7 and make that black. And it's your macro. Do whatever you want with it. I'm just going to do something kind of silly here. All right, so I've just selected a group of cells, right? So C5, E5, D7, B8, C9, D10, E9, F8. And I've painted all those cells black with the fill color, with the paint can. Now again, it's going to continue to record until I tell it to stop. So just like when you put a formula in a cell, when you're done with that formula, hit enter or hit tab. Same thing here. When you're done recording a macro, hit the stop record button. There we go. So now we've got, we've just written our, if you've never done any programming before, you have just written your first computer program. Let's go look at it. Let's go marvel in this thing. So I've got that sized over this side here. We'll look at the whole thing. So you see what I did. I did it kind of quickly. Let's make sure we saw what we did. Go over to View on your macros, drop the window down, go to View Macros, and then there's an Edit button. Right now I've got macro 1 selected. I'm going to hit the Edit button. And that'll bring up the VBA, the Visual Basic for Applications window where I can go in and edit. So this macro 1 lives over here in module 1, right? We didn't have to do anything. It created that for us. And you can see there's a lot of code here. Honestly, you don't need all of this, but that's okay. And I've been messing with macros for 15 years now, writing VBA macros for Excel and other software. I can't type most of this stuff out by hand. I wouldn't need to. Why would you? You can just record yourself doing it. It generates the code and it works. But that doesn't mean we can't look at it and try to dissect that code and try to think about what is this code doing. So I think you can read through here and see, well, this first line of code within the macro. So here's where the macro starts. Sub for subroutine or macro, and then the name of the macro. And then there's first line of code here where we're actually doing something is range C5 select. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out what that line of code is doing, right? That was the first thing we did, was selected cell C5. And then you've got this set of commands here, that the with commands, right? So you got with selection. We're going to change the interior of the selection, and then there's some information there about how we're going to change the interior of the selection. Again, this is the stuff I'm not going to type out by hand. There's just no reason to. Record yourself doing it, let it generate that code for you. Here's how VBA works is if something goes on for multiple lines, right? So that this with statement, for example, we're doing all this stuff to the interior of the selection, all these things. And then once you're done doing all those things, you have to end something, in this case, the with statement. If something goes on for multiple lines, you've got to end it at some point. Same thing with the macro. The macro starts with this word sub up here at the very top. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's this end sub. Again, that's basic, that's simple VBA structure. Is when something goes on for multiple lines, it has to be, we have to tell it where to stop. And we're gonna see that in the next video. We're gonna have to write if statements with this. Okay. Okay, so what else here? We started out, we selected cell C5, we changed its color, then we went to E5, and we did the same thing. So notice the same with statement we see here and here. And then we went on to D7. So you guys get the idea, right? It's just saying select the cell and then do the things needed to make that cell black. That's it. Pretty simple. So if I go back to Excel here, And if I highlight this group of cells, I go home and I no fill that. Right, and I go back to view macros, and I run macro 1, boom, 1 click instead of the, I don't know, 10 to 20 clicks that it would take to do that by hand. There's some simpler ways to do it, yes, but if you know this is a task that you're going to do on a regular basis, write yourself a macro, boom, 1 click, it gets done. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Example, record a macro where you select multiple cells and change their fill color, and then go look at the code, and that's what we just did. All right, now, inevitably, you're going to forget something. You're going to write this cool macro. It's going to do all these steps. It's going to save you all this time. And, you know, it'd be nice if it did just this 1 or 2 more things. You will always forget something, or you'll figure out later, hey, this would be something extra that we could do. Let's talk about how do we do that. You could just record the entire macro over again. That's fine. That's not the only way to do this. What else can we do, right? Well, let's say I want to add something to an existing macro. Here's how I like to do it. I'm going to record a new macro, and this one I'm going to call dummy. I like to use the word dummy. That's the individual the guy that taught me how to do VBA macros. That's what he would say, is right. Record yourself a dummy macro, and that tells you, hey, dummy, you forgot this, or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to record a dummy macro, and that just tells me it's temporary. Come back to it later, or get rid of it later. Let's say I want to put a circle around this. All right, so I'm just going to highlight. For me, that's going to be C2 through E2. Go back to home. Let's do the paint can, paint it black. We'll come down here. We'll do, for me, that's going to be F3, and then we'll do a group of cells down here, G4 through G10. I'm going pretty quickly here, right, because this is intended to be a video for instruction. I'm going to go F11. We'll go C12 through E12, B11, A4 through A10, and then back to B3, and then stop recording. Okay, now let's go look at that one. So if I go back to view macros, bring this window up, and I can edit either one of these. All right, now I can edit the dummy. And by the way, if you scroll up, notice macro 1's up here. They're all in the same module. There's a line dividing them where this is the end sub. That's the end of macro 1. Here's sub dummy. That's where the dummy macro starts. And then look at the first line of code that's relevant here. Range C2 colon E2. Select. That says select the group of cells, everything from C2 to E2. And the same with statement we saw earlier. Paint those all black. And we got a single cell F3, paint it black. And we got a group going down G4 to G10. That's what the colon does, is allows you to select a group of cells from this one to that one and everything in between. So we'll talk a little bit about cell selection in the future video, but that kind of gets us started. So what do we do with that? Well, again, I'd like all this to be in one single macro. 1 click, it all gets done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of this code in the dummy macro. Now, notice I did not get the end sub. Very careful before I release that left click. I don't want the end sub because I've got one up above, and I don't want 2. It's really going to upset VBA if I give it 2. So I'm going to copy. That's Control C or right click copy, or however you know to copy. I'm going to go up here to VB into macro 1. After this end with, before the next end sub, I'm going to paste, Control V or right click paste, and go up to edit paste. And that puts all the code from the dummy macro here. All of it's now in macro 1. It's one big, long, ugly, but big, long macro. Now, if I go back to Excel, let's give me a blank canvas here. Go home and no fill. Let's run. Let's go to view macros, view macro, and let's run macro 1. Everything should now be in one single macro. Boom. Does the whole thing, 1 click. I'm going to stop here, and we'll pick up on the next video. Probably break this into 2 or 3 parts. Let's see. I'm going to stop here, and we'll go to the next one.